Welcome to Post Games, everybody, a podcast about why and how we love video games. My name is Chris Plant, and I am so happy to have you here. So this year, whenever I hop on a call with a video game developer or we chat over drinks, I've noticed a strange change. Even for the most benign discussions, many developers ask to be on background. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the term on background, is basically journalistic speak for, hey, I'll share context, but keep my name and any specifics out of any stories you write. What we chat about in these conversations, though, it isn't unique or even especially serious. It's mostly run-of-the-mill industry chatter, the kind that I've had with sources for over a decade. So, I began to ask my contacts why. Why is there so much sudden secrecy over the humdrum? I tended to get two different answers. One reason I honestly expected, but the other surprised me. First, and most obvious, publicly, a developer wants to present calm and composed exteriors because they're trying to secure funding or stretch their savings as far as it'll go to meet payroll. But behind the scenes, they're dealing with some fires. Maybe they're crunching to meet a deadline, maybe they're sweating to find the next round of investment, maybe they're still trying to find what makes their game special, and they're unsure how much runway they have left, and they're a little worried. I get why a developer, whether they run the studio or they just took a junior job in QA, would be protective of the external image of the company for fear of causing internal strife or externally skepticism amongst potential investors. I've always heard a version of that concern, and with the current precarious political and economic environment, it's unsurprising that that feeling would spread across a wider swath of the industry, that more people would feel more pressure to be cautious, to be secretive. But then there's the other reason, the opposite. Behind the scenes, a developer is thriving. Sales outperformed their expectations. They found steady funding. They went viral. Steam wish lists have skyrocketed, or they simply feel intensely confident in their creative vision. But they don't want to make a thing of it. These devs, they are hesitant to show any success, let alone swagger, for fear of being perceived as out of touch with the current apocalyptic mood. Now, to be clear, this is a smaller cohort. More game developers I speak to are terrified than overjoyed. But the dichotomy is real, and it miniaturizes the state of video games in 2025. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. And most people are acting like it's just an average day at the office. So, today, on Post Games, are video games okay? Post Games' first annual physical, in which a special guest joins me to assess the health and the stability of gaming, from the creators to the players, the industry to the culture. That is right, I will be doing this every year, right smack dab in the middle of it, after Summer Games Fest, before the fall, when all the games start coming out. We're gonna give this industry and all the people who live in it and love it a checkup. And here is how it will go today. For Patreon subscribers, something new. A prologue bonus act in which I revisit the state of games 10, 20, and 30 years ago. Because who doesn't love some historical context? For the main show, I have invited one of the smartest, analytical, and forward-thinking minds in video games, writer, developer, publisher, critic, analyst, and occasional voice actor, Xalavier Nelson Jr., to help me give video games a thorough workup. Act 1, the best of times. A conversation with Xalavier about the case for now being gaming's golden age. Act 2, the worst of times. Xalavier and I discuss why much of gaming feels doomed. another bonus interview act for patrons. Xalavier gives me his opinions on gaming's past, present, and future. And always Act 3, the news of the week, including the ghoulish mass layoffs at Xbox. It is a lot of time with my guest today. If you already know this person, you are positively thrilled. If you are less familiar with Xalavier, let me tell you, you are about to leave this episode a fan. Not just of him as a game maker, but as a thinker and as a person. I've had a lot of wonderful people on this show, and this person is really special to me. So I hope you enjoy it. With that, we've got a lot of show for you. Let's get to it. It is a new year and you want to eat better, but you still have no time to work with. You have no energy. You have so much going on in your life. What do? You do Factor. 2 minutes, real food, and you are done. You're not failing at eating healthy. You're failing at having 3 extra hours in every night. You're failing at not being a chef and wanting to do cleanup. Factor takes care of that. It has delicious food that is good for you. You got lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole food ingredients, and none of the yucky stuff, no refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners. It will offer you whatever you need to match your lifestyle. For me, Mediterranean diet, it really works well. But maybe you need something else, like a high-protein diet or GLP-1 support or ready-to-eat salads. Whatever it is, Factor wants to meet you on your page. Always fresh, never frozen, and like I said, ready in 2 minutes with no prep, no cleanup. Just chill. I use Factor. I think that you should too. Head to factormeals.com/postgames, 50 off, and use code postgames50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus free breakfast for a year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscriptions purchase. Make healthier eating easy with Factor. Act 1. The best of times. I first met Xalavier nearly a decade ago. First on Twitter, then over coffees at a grimy San Francisco diner. He was still a college student at the time, though he'd already built a reputation as a wunderkind, cutting his teeth with credits on a variety of indie games, and even publishing some op-eds at outlets like Polygon. Since then, he has co-founded indie Strange Scaffold, which publishes roughly 2.5 games every year. That's an incredible publish rate, even by the standards of the 90s. In just the past few months, Strange Scaffold has brought the strategic first-person shooter I Am Your Beast to consoles, launched a turn-based tactics RPG set in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles universe, and released Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3, a survival horror match 3 comedy that is in fact not the third entry in the series. It's a lot. Xalavier is, needless to say, productive. And in that productivity, Xalavier sees so much of how the industry works. He knows what it's like to get games on every piece of hardware. He knows the pluses and minuses of every economic ladder, and he has a great idea of what players are actually looking for. He's also pretty realistic about what of his own work does and doesn't succeed. I was so happy to have him on today's episode to talk with us about the industry, and so happy that we could start with something a bit challenging. I think the more challenging one to kick things off, which is the positive one. So I'd like you to make a case for why video games are, in this moment, in a golden era.
The golden era of games is related to a lot of things. It is an accessibility of not just technology, but distribution. So many people can make games. And now you don't have to fight to be on a store shelf anymore. You can, for $100, be on Steam next to Grand Theft Auto 5. And it's unlikely you'll beat Grand Theft Auto 5, but there's a chance. And that alone redistributes everything in terms of where and how we conceive of success. It's coming from everywhere, all the time. So you have accessibility of distribution, you have accessibility of technology, you have accessibility to a degree of information on how people are doing things, not just looking at the games that people built, but you can, without going to San Francisco, look at things from the GDC vault, and you can see all sorts of talks and streams and little dev diaries on Blue Sky or Twitter of how people built the things that they've made. So people's ability to observe a success or observe something that they loved and then find their own twist or spin on it has been hyper accelerated. In this era, you have so many games available in so many forms at once through emulation, both official and unofficial. You have a really potent foundation for people to play a bunch of things, pull from a bunch of inspirations, including their peers, and make and iterate on the things that they have more so than any other time. You have updating, which I have complicated feelings about, but it is undeniable that in this era, the fact that a game can grow, can evolve, can change itself, not just increasing its size, but sometimes scaling back. Fortnite puts things in the game and then takes them out. That's an exponential game changer. Cross-platform multiplayer is an exponential game changer. We exist in a time where not only do more relative opportunities exist than ever, but there's so many ways to grapple with those opportunities and to, in an individualistic, agency-focused way, determine how you will approach a landscape. Even if that landscape is on fire, it is undeniable that the things that are happening in games could not happen in any other medium right now. So I am struck every year, despite the fact that the pandemic lockdown occurred, despite the fact that every day we are stunned by headlines around the world, the games that are getting made and the mastery they show of a form and the ways they push and explore that form is exponential and exciting and means a lot of people can make a livelihood regardless of where they are or who they are. And that's very special and something that I really hope that we can hold on to, because when you lose it, as several other art forms have, I think notably TV is the biggest one in recent decades, you don't get it back.
That is a perfect transition to the external success. So that is what you described as great internally, right? Like, I get how that helps all the people who are inside of the games community. How, in this golden era, do you see video games reaching its tendrils out into mainstream popular culture?
You have, of course, adaptations like Fallout. You have big investment and a cultural respect towards the story of games and the creative output of games that I think even games struggles to hold for itself. I think we still have a cultural insecurity that Hollywood just sees an IP. I use that term intentionally. They're like, that's an IP that 10 million people care about. And games goes, but what about Paul Thomas Anderson? He's really cool. And Paul Thomas Anderson is cool. But you've made something that reached 10 million people. And that's just an undeniable number. So I think my dad actually is maybe the best example of how games has evolved into mainstream over time, because he loved anime back when people called it Japanimation, back when it was hard to get a hold of. He was a member of the armed forces, and so actually within the military community, anime spread much more and much faster than it did to the wider world. And he recently had a conversation with me of like, man, like now everyone's wearing Naruto shirts, and that feels wrong. Like the fact that Walmart carries Bendy and the Ink Machine. Those aren't words in the Bible, but it's carrying Bendy and the Ink Machine shirts and toys, and Skibbity Toilet has Michael Bay activated and ready to build a cinematic franchise for it. It's ridiculous. It is existentially galling in some cases, but it is undeniable that what was so-called nerd culture is because of things like the MCU, because of major game adaptations doing well and being pursued at mass level, and because there's so many ways games can be in people's lives, because of cross-platform multiplayer, things getting ported everywhere. That's golden age material, and that means that when I tell people my job, even now compared to a couple of years ago, people are like, oh yeah, you're a game developer. Games are things made by people, and a lot of people play games. And that is a cultural ubiquity that I think people grapple with for good and for bad. As in my dad's case, he was like, I'm a true fan of anime. I love anime. There's just a bunch of people walking around with Bleach shirts and they don't even know who he is. That's Ichigo Kurosaki. I'm like, yes, I get it, Dad.
You're a real one. I get it. You were there before it was cool.
They should know who Ichigo Kurosaki is and the journey he went on to reach Bankai. I understand.
I was there for the slow arcs, the really bad arcs.
Oh, and they sure had them.
Okay, so I've thrown you some of the fastballs down the middle. Now, a little bit of a curveball here. Which major publisher, and we're speaking comparably, I guess, is doing the best, is differentiating itself, that represents a good job in the golden era?
If the highlight of the golden era is a lot of beautiful things happening at the same time in different ways, there's a lot of people winning in this regard. I think that Capcom and their ability to revive and maintain and in some cases transform their franchises with Monster Hunter World and then Wilds, Resident Evil's Resurrection, Dragon's Dogma 2, which is one of the great achievements I think in games of the past 20 years, and that's not an exaggeration. That's a wild game. It could not have existed in any other era. And Capcom is on their franchise level just kind of maintaining and expanding and doing interesting things all of the time. The publisher, I'd say, that is really struggling in this time is Paradox. Paradox has, and this is all public information, but they're pushing games into indefinite delay weeks before they're supposed to come out. They're canceling games right before they come out. Paradox going from the studio that would release a lot of things that were for the sickos that really cared about those things, and Paradox acquiring White Wolf and having ownership of a supernatural sexy RPG universe when like Book Talk exists, and that is just a money printer, and really being seemingly very scared to release anything when they used to be the people who would release things and they would come out, they'd be like 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, and then they just support it. That was the strategy, to leaning into the same blockbuster mindset of a lot of their peers and not being able to release things has taken what was one of the most vibrant and consistent publishers out there, and I think really harmed their ability to exist, and by virtue, a little pocket of an entire part of gaming to exist.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because the easy answer there, I think, is the Ubisoft or the EA for some of their more public, stumblings. But I think that is a much richer answer. Your point about Book Talk is so spot on, and I think is a sentiment that's kind of making its way across the games community. I did an episode on lewd games and sexy games a few weeks ago, and a comment I saw from a few different listeners was, what will happen once somebody high up or with money at lewd games and somebody in the Book Talk publishing come together? What if we just paired these two formulas together and got people actually crossing these two massive networks, but often overlooked networks? And I think the Book Talk of it all is just wildly under-tapped and under-acknowledged in games.
I think that is one of, not to jump the gun, but I think that's one of the things when we talk about the under recognized parts of games. I think part of the reason that games is also in a very dangerous place is because our massive amount of success has given us a myopia. So yes, we're looking now at film and film adaptations, and film adaptations are certainly looking at us. But the fact that more games are not interacting with the book talk community, or this is kind of weird, but like I was in Planet Fitness and I was just looking at TVs and they're distributing the same 5 trailers for Chipotle or whatever. And I'm like, man, this is a literal captive audience that no or very few game audiences are reaching, is very telling of where we're at, especially as publishers look for more conservative bets and more ways to ensure that their money is handled properly and that they have their risk mitigated, is they are looking at the exact same ways to do it as an aggregate, which means Reddit ads in the past 10 years have shot up in price because everyone centered around Reddit ads, and by virtue of driving up that price, kind of price even themselves out of continuing to use that as a consistent source of reaching audiences. Meanwhile, this is part of what impacted Strange Scaffold's strategy over the last few years, is we're working with the PR people that we are now, because they were one of the very few people that were willing to talk to things that weren't game outlets. I would reach out to a variety of PR firms and say, hey, so when we make a game about dogs, or when we make a game about, I don't know, parenthood, can we reach out to like mom blogs, which are still a huge thing, especially if you look at how that culture has transitioned to occupying Instagram and TikTok. There's all these people, all these places thinking about all these different things and having an openness to how their interests are being represented in different places, that I was stunned when I was coming with money in hand to different firms, and they're like, we have really strong contacts at IGN. And I'm like, that's cool. I didn't ask if you know the people at IGN. I also know the people at IGN. Can you reach out to a music blog if we release a full rap album alongside a game? And the number of people who were even willing to think about that was sparingly low. And that is, to me, an indication that, wow, for an industry that is so often occupying a feasibly sustainable economic space, we're really, really bad at thinking about people and where they're at. And yeah, that's the myopia of games is something I think about a lot these days in terms of what's really hurting us.
I totally get it. I remember at Polygon when we would go through hiring and we would get 1,200, 1,300 applications. And how many of them, the entire cover letter was, I play video games. It's like, well, I hope you do. But I think that speaks to that myopia. I'm not surprised with, I believe your publicist is the front person of a band that tours nationally.
50cc PR is run by Lizzie Killian, who is the front person of Teens in Trouble. She's the front person of a punk band, of like a beach rock punk band. She's cool as hell. And at the exact time that games have so much cultural ubiquity, it's really weird that we're simultaneously saying people only want deck builders. We need to make some dark fantasy, Dark Souls stuff now. Elden Ring, and it's like, yeah, but what's succeeding in book talk? What is Netflix looking at in terms of their demographics and the things they're succeeding on there? I think the latest thing that did really well was The Core, which flopped at launch and did really, really well.
Fantastic film. Just, I mean, a flawless story about, overcoming the odds and drilling to the core of the earth.
And games is fighting so aggressively over a tiny pond when they have an entire ocean to explore, and that their players want to explore, and that a lot of people who would become game players want to explore. That's something on my mind.
Before we go full doom tilt, and we're going to do that in just a moment, you release an average of 2 to 2.5 games a year that you're credited on. Maybe more than that.
At Strange Scaffold, I release games I've directed 2 to 2.5 times a year. I am credited on far more titles because I also do work outside of the studio.
What motivates you to wake up every morning and create games?
The thing that I like most about working in games personally is the idea of being a craftsperson. I love the idea of having a time and a budget and wanting to make something that is the next game players don't know that they need. And so I wake up in the morning getting to work with incredible people to hit a mark and to hit it well and move on to hit the next mark. And I think that is honestly a change that has occurred, or rather been solidified, over the last 5-10 years. Because there was a point where I was really focused on awards, or I was really focused on, hey, let me make this game something that cements my legacy or establishes that I have a creative voice worth saying something. And a lot of that insecurity, honestly, is not present in my process anymore. So much of it now is, well, we're making a game about a guy in the corner of your hotel room who wants to click. He wants to watch you click a clicker. How do we make that? How do we make that in the time and the budget we've got? That's what excites me and gets me out of bed in the morning, and is part of why I've turned down some opportunities I would have killed for earlier in life. Because the shiny brass ring isn't just you pay to reach it, and the cost to reach that shiny brass ring or to attempt to do so isn't something I'm particularly interested in. Not when I can wake up and do good work and do it tomorrow as much as what is within my power.
I love that. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll look into the eye of hell and see where it takes us. Welcome back. If you don't mind, putting on your kind of a splash guard, I'm thinking the gore and human excrement we are about to walk through. But we're going to talk about why this is actually the worst of times for games now. So I would like you to make a case for why video games are doomed.
I think games are doomed because for an industry built on making systems that make people feel things and that achieve desired outcomes, we have not thought about the system of games and how it has brought us here and where we'll continue to go if we do this. As an example, there was a period of time, I think it's still here to a degree, where so much of games was trying to move towards doing licensed titles and treating licensed titles as the prestige titles. What that will do, if you follow that route 20 years from now, this is part of why Strange Scaffold still makes original stuff alongside having just released a licensed game, and that licensed game is only one we made for very specific reasons with a very specific studio identity in mind, is what you will communicate to players 20 years down the line is the good games, the games that have a guaranteed quality bar, are all licensed. So they're going to look for licenses. So you're going to try to make an original title and you'll be like, why aren't people buying these the way they used to? It's because you taught them to look for an outside IP to validate its existence. There's
movie's dilemma right now, right? I mean, we're living in that when you go to a movie theater.
And the role, and there's a lot of things that contributed to that, but the role of Hollywood saying, you know what, despite massive profits in these other divisions, we aren't going to use that to now build up a lot of original IP as well. We're just going to ratchet up how much we put into the franchises until it plateaus and then potentially craters. That is impacting that medium excessively. And it feels like it's something that games isn't looking at. And you can apply that to almost everything that is occurring right now. We, at a certain point in time, especially during the height of the pandemic lockdown, had a lot of people making money from games and investing more money in games than ever. They relied, sometimes explicitly, I would have conversations with executives at publishers, and they were like, yeah, we're going to get a Game Pass deal. And I was like, but you can't guarantee that. And then suddenly a few years ago, it wasn't even an overall turn down, but it was just like, no, we aren't going to say yes to everything. That strategies built around things will stay at that level of earnings or that level of platform deals was used as a tentpole strategy, and that will never change. And then a bunch of publishers started to buckle, and a bunch of distribution centers started to fall apart because they're like, oh, goodness, we couldn't have expected that anything would ever change.
Let's dig into that a little bit. Maybe you could explain to people who don't follow the business day to day.
Yeah.
Why expecting a Game Pass deal in 2021 to still be there in 2023 or 2024 was kind of obviously bad if you had been in video games for more than like a month.
So the very easy thing I can say is paraphrasing what someone told me directly, which was we would sign $5 million games, $7 million games because we were certain we would get a platform deal, which would mean we get a $7 million game to sell to the wider world for free, or we get, say, a $5 million game for $2 million. It's a bargain. It has a higher chance, quote unquote, of having an outsized success and a huge level of polish that is inherently put into that title. When / if a platform says no, that publisher is holding a $5 million bag they never thought they would have to pay for. So it's much like if you had taken if you believed that you had won the lottery and that you would continue to win the lottery every single month for the foreseeable future, and you spent accordingly, and then one month you were told not even that you won't ever win the lottery again, but for a couple of months you won't win the lottery. You have a jet ski fleet currently terrorizing the South Pacific. You have to pay for the jet skis. Those are leased every month. You can't afford to not have the lottery come in. And that that's not a one-off, ooh, whoopsie, games will recover. That is a systemic failure of strategy that is impacting players, and it's impacting the people who make the games that they love. And you can just apply that to almost anything that's happening right now.
We expanded out to the culture when we were talking about the good times. Let's do that for the bad times too. What corners of video game culture, or I guess even mainstream culture that are tied to video games, have you seen turned rotten or toxic over the last couple of years?
I have a normal answer and I have a spicy answer. Which one do you want?
I mean, I always want the spicy answer.
The spicy answer I have, and I'll set it up by giving the normal answer. You get both. You get both, Chris.
Okay,
You're
perfect,
that good.
perfect.
The normal answer of things that I think have turned toxic around games and game culture right now is we have not given almost any transparency into the levers that get pulled to bring people the games they love. So years and years and years ago, there was all this, well, maybe not that long, but the order of the day was frame rate. Everyone was obsessed with frame rate in the wider playing community because the frame rate is the only thing that they have access to say, my games would be better if the frame rate was stable at 60 frames per second. That's actually not guaranteed. But if it's the one tool you've got, that is the one thing you will demand and search for. So frame rate and resolution have been huge hot button topics, but now we're in this big fight across both investment centers and playing centers about things like Expedition 33. They're like, only 30 people made this. Only 30 people didn't make it. It was actually way more people than that. But when you have so little transparency into games and into levers, what that gets turned into is clearly the big teams can't make games that we love. We need smaller teams, actually. And if those smaller teams have hidden costs, like Expedition 33 had a lot of contractors. And to be clear, the Expedition 33 team has not been behind a lot of this spreading of the narrative that they only had 33 people. But it is very much something that has broken containment and gone outside of their control and is being perpetuated. And I'm seeing a bunch of investors on LinkedIn now say, here's how much, here's what Expedition 33 was able to achieve with this small amount of resources or people. We have a lot of flawed narratives about why you're getting games you love or why you aren't getting games you love that are all based around really obfuscated information. And because you don't have that information as a player typically, you don't know what to ask for or what to demand to protect yourself as well as the developers who make the things that you love. You actually don't know how to pull those levers. And often, sometimes the investors don't know what levers to pull to get those games. And so things get weirder and harder and more inconsistent on every level. And the spicy take is, this has resulted in a counter-narrative. I want shorter games with worse graphics made by people who are paid more to work less. Here's the problem with that. People don't buy those gosh damn games. You still buy Baldur's Gate 3 because of course you do. It's a freaking masterpiece. And so a counter-narrative based on obfuscated information and a lack of precision in the game development process, and a mainstream narrative of looking for the next thing to just try to find a consistent way to get the games that will make you feel. All of that has resulted in a gosh dang mess. And it's going to keep getting worse if we don't introduce transparency. And every time we do introduce transparency, it's going to be tough because we've spent the past 50 years not having it.
I agree. And I want to pick at all of this a little bit more because there's some sensitive spots underneath these different, I guess, like scabby wounds. One is I completely agree of the I want games by fewer people paid more that are crappier or whatever, like that version of it.
It's also, just briefly to interrupt, it's also so shitty. Can I curse on this?
Yeah, of course.
It's so shitty to set that up as a worse game, and you are a more ethical people for wanting to let worse games. Like, one, it doesn't result in worse games to have a lower budget or worse graphics. And when you set that up, of course, a whole lot of people who aren't going to want to follow you down that route because they want to play good games. So
yes.
You've not just set up a toxic environment for talking about the production of games, you have also already salted the earth for the people who are trying to push for more sustainable approaches by saying that it will result in a shittier game, but that's what you want because that is you being more ethical to ask for that. It's the worst.
I think what's really hard and where I have a lot of sympathy for the people who are saying things like that is once you do start to get this information, people don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So because you have such little information, then a studio that is modern indie and it's 100 people and they come out and they say, well, 100 people made this. Then people go, well, it doesn't look as good as Expedition 33. The numbers are so all over the place that people start making these comparisons that are completely incoherent. And once you bring in the global nature of the industry, it's even more chaotic because I don't want to be surprised that an MBA does not seem to know the difference between making a game in one country versus another. But
or this is also super under-discussed, the idea that certain countries have arts funding and grants. That changes the dynamics and the economics of making video games massively, so much so that I've seen very predatory language within the industry of, you know what, we should get more games from Southeast Asia or from Brazil, and a team will make a Metroidvania for a fifth of the price. And I'm like, on one hand, that is a reasonable thing for you to identify and target as a business person. On the other hand, what you're talking about is very literally colonization via capital. It is you wanting to harvest those games for as long as those games give you a similar product for a cheaper price, and then you no longer care about that creative team or voice or cultural difference as soon as the economics change. And like explaining that and talking to people who have decades of years of industry experience and say, yeah, part of the thing that made that game work at that scale was it was partially subsidized by another country. They got
the
tax
Canadian
breaks.
government.
Yeah, Canadian government. Or this is a similar thing in film where why are so many things filmed in Georgia or New Mexico? They've got amazing tax incentives, and those get bundled up with the creative intention and turned into actual things. And if you don't follow the money, if you aren't aware of the money, if it's never spoken about, if it's a dirty word, or if people will get torn to shreds when they do share it, then what you end up with is total confusion as to why are good games coming from here or from this studio or from that studio, but not from this one. And there's a lot of complicated reasons, but a lot of it does come back to the systemic structures that result in the games. This is part of why EA has struggled to launch things in recent years, is because you aren't just looking at, say, what happened to BioWare. You have to ask, what is the ecosystem and structure of EA that they exist within? And as the recent report that Jason Schreier did showed, the ecosystem they were within, really talented devs all, meant that BioWare trying to make the next Dragon Age was constantly dragged across the asphalt trying to reach that point. We aren't just trying to make good games, we're trying to create ecosystems that produce good games. And the scary thing about where I'd say the investor class is in for games right now is because they are sometimes willfully ignorant of the ecosystems that produce games. They just want the results, not the process. And so they're asking for, say, Caves of Cut or Dwarf Fortress, but asking teams to make it in 2 years. Those are 20-year games for a reason. And you will continue to be disappointed trying to get 20-year games in 2 because of the inherent processes that a 20-year game needs.
I mean, that's why I volunteer my consultancy fees whenever people ask, and I say, try it in 3 years. I think that's where you can pull it off. 2 years, too soon. Now, 3 years, and then I collect my money. This is not true. But if you do want that consulting, I am available. I want to get 2 more Doomed questions, and then we can get into the muddy in-between and wrap things up. Doomed. The thing that gives me anxiety is somebody not in the games industry, but who covers it and is trying to engage with the audience, is this contradiction between the habits of the people who play games and the goals of the people who make them. And there are these contradictions, there are many of these contradictions, but the big one is younger players spend more and more time in fewer and older games. And on the dev side, more people are creating new games than ever before. So you have an audience that is playing fewer and older games, and then you have more games coming out that are new. Where is that heading?
Where it's heading is, among other things, you need to have, I would go so far as to say you need to have a backlog of creativity, either on a publisher level or on an individual creator level, to create a foundation of stability. I will watch a movie knowing nothing else about it if I know that this director or this writer is behind it. I want to see what they made next. Or sometimes I'll be real, I like Glenn Powell's face. If Glenn Powell's in something, I'm paying attention. So I'm looking at the next Glenn Powell movie or TV show, and I'm intrigued by what that means. And by virtue of who's involved in that process. And if you're going to follow that route in games, there's precious few, because so many games take 2 to 5 years. They usually don't have a consistent directorial voice. It gets really muddy and weird trying to follow games people that you love and games perspectives that you adore. This is part of why it really helps to release things, is you can have people years after the fact discover your games. I'll use just Strange Scaffold as an example. Some of our best-selling titles still are our older ones. We're getting sales spikes in games that initially at their release flopped. And where that's coming from is people discovering them out of nowhere, as well as people looking at the newest thing we made and saying, hey, what else did they make? We really like them. In 2024, there was reported that only 15% of people played a game released in that year. One of the solutions to that is you need to have games that are older. You need to have games that people can follow. The other thing is, if you're making a game in a crowded genre, you're not competing against the person who was making this game in 2024 alongside you. You're competing against the game released 10 years ago that's had 10 years of updates and is still going. Every cozy game right now is competing with Stardew Valley, not with whoever is launching even in their same week. And that is something that I think the industry at large still has not reckoned with on a lot of levels. And that will mean more gets invested into these new titles to make them larger prospects, something that has a chance of breakout success. And when/if those creators don't have the ability to make another title and eventually bring people back to this game that was great all along, it's just dead on arrival, and they all split apart and try to find work elsewhere.
So I feel like I'm getting kind of the secret sauce of your studio. Would you say it's better to ship often, ship maybe a little messy, and move on than it is to invest in the same project in hopes that it one day becomes the next No Man's Sky?
The unfortunate answer is it depends. It's what your studio is built around. So one thing I really respect about, again, just going to a developer that had a long-running game and built a process to support that, a game like Caves of Cud, is they didn't sign like a publisher deal to try to make that game in 3 years. They slow-rolled that game because it has a lot of features. It needs a lot of systems. It needs a lot of time. It needs a lot of iteration. And so they created an environment where it was feasible for them to give that game that time. The studio strategy was built around that while they continued to pay their bills. Strange Scaffold's strategy has explicitly, I've been very open about this, is we make games, we move on to the next game, and every individual game is trying to be unique and meaningful, but no one game is attempting to be, for either us or our players, the last thing that we ever make. I don't need or want a No Man's Sky style platform for making games in a given setting for 10 years. I am excited by the game we're going to make 3 years from now once we get past this current slate of projects. And we build everything in our strategy to enable that. Among other things, that means that there's deals we don't take and people we don't work with because it will not enable us to actually do that. And that is where I think you see the difference right now, especially in between some of the biggest success stories of recent years and anything else, is how do you get a Delta Rune? You get a Delta Rune because Undertale made all the money in the world. And so you can just make games with your friends for as long as you want. And that game has a huge built-in audience. People, including people who have been playing it for free for years and obsessing about it and want the next chapters. It comes out on Switch 2. I don't know if you looked at the Switch 2 charts when it came out, but like Mario Kart World and Deltarune and everything else had its ass kicked. You build systems to enable your outcomes. And so that's the Strange Scaffold secret sauce alongside luck. And that is where I think the industry is really in a dangerous place right now because they are not approaching solutions systemically. They're looking for the next Balatro. And Balatro is also something that came from such an individual process and still could have failed. Not looking for processes that create outcomes will lead to worse games for your players.
So, one last question in the doomed category. Yeah. Let's say we fix all of this. Everything's working great. Somehow we figured out all these great processes. Publishers, they've gotten their act together. They know when to invest and when to not. People have learned that scope exists. It's a great time. Unfortunately, there's this little thing called AI, artificial intelligence, and the investor class still is really into it for the next 3 years. What level of anxiety should everyone have about AI in game development, and not just for the people who are making games, but for the people who are playing them?
I think for the people who play games, AI is often a resource to extend more from less. It's not actually giving you more. It's not providing you with something. It's not attempting to step in to provide something exceptional. It is endless grist that will get increasingly polished over time, but it won't stop it from being grist that is intended to just keep you here. I think malaise, which is already something that I think players struggle with, is going to become an even bigger problem, because it's like, yeah, I'm stuck in the sandbox, which is actually a landfill just filled with a bunch of things that I can talk to, and they all have AI, and so they'll give me responses. But what do those mean? Why am I here is going to become an existential big question that developers that purely want to focus on giving content, that's just going to become an even greater issue.
I spoke with Frank Lance on a previous episode of this, and he talked about this in relation to the immersion fallacy. But that idea of if you can make a perfect replica of the world, then what do? Then you decide that you need to go play a game inside of that replica? Like, if you have all of the choice, you end up kind of right back where you started. And it does feel like we are barreling towards this problem of creating artificiality with no purpose. And then us hoping that the player or the consumer will figure out the purpose.
Or the dream of endlessly customized content. And I think that is something that's seemingly appealing. Apply this to a TV show, right? I want Gilmore Girls, but Rory ends up with Jess. So something gets outputted and does that, and you're left with the end of that. Are you satisfied? I want a Gilmore Girls sequel just for me, and it has me in it. This is something that's been trumpeted as the next frontier of content that includes you or centers you or is customized for you. Art is fundamentally not just a way to spend time. It is a way to get connected. You have a connection with the person on the other side. You like a storytelling beat to a degree because you like the instincts of the storyteller who delivered it to you. And when storytellers are removed from that, and all it is you asking for things and then it being served on your plate like a fast food item, it actually won't give you what you're asking for. It will give you the appearance of it. That's going to really hurt. And on the developer side, I think the generative AI question is not as scary as it initially seems. It has two giant pitfalls. The first one is genericism. It will continue to encourage genericism. The more generic you are, the less people care about your stuff in a world of endless grift. Grist and grift. And that will lead to a lot of studios, I think, hitting really, really hard walls in terms of 30 people worked on this. We spent $50 million. Why didn't it do well? It's because, one of my favorite people in games, especially for thinking about a wider scale systemic thought, is Sam Chiat. I worked with him on Witch Strandings and on Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator. And something he said to me, which defined AI in my head ever since, was AI can't be a competitive advantage, because a competitive advantage is something that you have and no one else has. So if everyone has AI and everyone's typing in dark medieval fantasy setting, giant armor, you will end up with very similar results at the end of the day. And so players will use other criteria to judge whether or not to get into your stuff, and may choose to ignore it at all, because here comes an Expedition 33 or a Deltarune that is just providing a product. The second major pitfall and fear point for me, because I'm very aware of how that will also impact the ecosystem, is removing jobs for entry-level people. There's a lot of invisible work that goes into any game. Settings menus have to be set up. The store art and capsule art has to be set up. Someone has to do every avatar and every character portrait you see in a video game, or at least has had to, or created a procedurally generated system composed of a bunch of different pieces to do that to date. When you have AI generating those things, people don't get jobs to do the little important things that lead to them taking on bigger things over time. And so something games has already had an issue with film has had an issue with of extremely senior staff, maybe extremely junior staff, and this giant gulf of people who are not ready to step into seniority is just going to get worse, and that's going to result in worse games and in more difficulty navigating storefronts. It's been hitting the PlayStation Store and the Switch Store really bad. These environments are utterly unparsable because these are all, comparatively to earlier times, to a degree, adequate pieces of cover art, but none of them communicate anything specific. And so you're looking for a new game with your shiny new system, and it's like Horror Match 7, the Darkening. I have no idea if that's real or not or worth my time. And so your automatic response as a human being is to filter. It is to disregard by default. And this is actually hitting the advertising centers of games really, really badly, because one thing that we're seeing is that the principle of advertising was the more points of contact you have, the better you're going to perform commercially. Where I've seen that evolve is that now it's a point of care economy, where by default, no one gives a shit about you. And you actually need to give them more and more reasons to give a shit for them to start to think about considering your project. AI doesn't give you the inherent basis to start giving a shit. And it will look like, especially for the next 3 years, it can or will, and will have at least one notable success from it. And we'll have a lot of people that create games more forgettable than would otherwise be made. If I can just keep yammering on for one more second.
No, please.
One of the most, I think, notable examples of this is, I think, the Fortnite Darth Vader AI activation. Fortnite is, I think, one of the greatest achievements in games. It is a wild feat of production and really clear and intentional content pipelines to produce what is the biggest game in the world, because it keeps changing so often, because they built an entire now like multi-level conglomerate structure to enable creative processes like that. It's changing all the time. Fortnite is not Fortnite a year from now, but it's also Fortnite. And you should get the battle pass, because now Rick and Morty has a penis gun. One of the things that happened most recently is they did a giant season in the middle of summer just around Star Wars. No gun in the game had ammo. That's an intentional decision by a game designer. Everything was blasters. A lot of Star Wars content all over the map, all of these intentional decisions made to how do you create a holistic Star Wars experience that lasts for 6 weeks, 8 weeks inside of the world of Fortnite and then can disappear. One of those features was an NPC on the map called Darth Vader, who could be recruited. You could buy items from him like any other Fortnite NPC. But also, if you used your microphone, you could talk to Darth Vader. And using an AI, and using generative AI, the voice of James Earl Jones would talk back to you in a voice that was flavored like Darth Vader. It was really interesting watching videos of people interacting with AI Darth Vader, because the first thing they did was they got him to say a bunch of slurs and semi-racist things. But outside of that, if you watch the videos of people interacting with Darth Vader, the dream is have a conversation with Darth Vader. You and Darth Vader are wandering through the countryside, and you get to have conversations. You get to have it in real time with real language, and you get to have your Darth Vader adventure inside of the wider Fortnite Star Wars adventure. All the money, yeah. But after roughly like 5 questions, outside of novelty or potentially getting Darth Vader to say something naughty, people sat with Darth Vader in uncomfortable silence. Or they treated him like this, basically just a billboard, which is what he would have been otherwise, for far less money and cost that could have been assigned to all other kind of departments on the game, all sorts of other technical innovations or mechanics or features they could have done. Everything costs something. So if you put your time or energy into one thing, it's not going elsewhere. And this Fortnite AI Darth Vader sits there sucking up resources, provides you a moment of novelty, and leaves you wondering why you should care or what to do next. And that, I think, is a perfect billboard for how a generative AI future in games is going to manifest uncomfortably often. Is, yes, I can do anything. Why does it matter?
Okay, so we've talked about the golden era. We've talked about the doomed hellscape. What would you say is the reality of it all? When we bring this all together, what is the status of video games? Are video games okay?
Right now, I think in a lot of ways in our wider world, we can see a need to speak up, lest the things that we care about go away potentially forever. We desperately need, I think in this time, one, are games okay? The depressing thing is that they will be. That no matter how bad it gets right now, there's so many people making games and playing games, there will always be something that pops off on Steam and provides some glimmer of hope that even though all the systems are broken, maybe we can still put all of our chips in and win. But systemically, in so many different ways, in so many different parts of the industry, things are happening to remove players from getting the games that they love and getting them consistently from developers that they could come to interact with and could be their favorite creator in the same way that your favorite musician might be Taylor Swift or your favorite director might be Martin Scorsese. We're getting removed from the ability for people to survive long enough to give you the best games you've ever played. So you'll still get the best games you've ever played, but it's not going to be consistent. And it's not going to be even potentially from consistent voices. It's going to be scattershot, and that will leave you confused and frustrated as you try to get the next cool thing because you don't know where it's coming from or where to find it or if it already exists. And instead, you're just playing Fortnite because there's nothing else to play. I play Fortnite because I find it quite good. For this time where we're going to be okay no matter what, weirdly enough, I think for people to get the best version of video games, they have to be loud right now. They have to look for creators they want to stay alive and buy their games today. They have to tweet and stream and talk about the games and the creators and the processes they love and care about today. Because you can't afford not to for this thing to stick around. If you don't like generative AI in your stuff, you have to be really loud about it today, and you have to not buy games based off of that today, because otherwise the tolerance window just builds up and you are left in the malaise in the future that gets created. We are in the era in so many levels, even on a society level, with some of the horrific things happening right now, where the new ecosystems and the new systems that will define the next 10 years of how you live and how you enjoy your favorite pastime are getting set. So you just got to be loud. You got to be loud right now and talk about the things that you need and what you want.
Act 3, This Week in Video Games. Earlier this week, Microsoft reportedly laid off as many as 9,000 employees, the majority of them part of Xbox. The cuts are so wide-ranging and severe that the total impact is still being assessed. Here's what we know so far. Microsoft has canceled multiple games, including Rare's Everwild, a Bethesda MMORPG, and Perfect Dark. The latter studio was also closed, and several other unannounced games are canceled too. Longtime studios like Turn 10, the makers of Forza, reportedly saw over 70 people get cut. Warcraft Rumble's team experienced layoffs, and the game will no longer receive content updates. Partnerships appear to have been impacted too. Ramiro Games' new shooter has been canceled. Trailers for games like Avalanche's Contraband have disappeared, causing people to speculate about the status of it and other projects. And longtime, extremely senior game makers have left their roles after decades of work in the space. Meanwhile, Microsoft Gaming CEO Phil Spencer has said that he does not plan to retire anytime soon. I first interviewed Spencer over a decade ago, and I had the good fortune then of meeting many of his, at that time, smartest and most creative lieutenants. Almost none of them still work at Xbox, or they have shifted into new roles. I have long seen the appeal of Xbox's big vision under Spencer, but this is the fourth layoff event in 18 months. Estimates for total employees laid off in the last 2.5 years are between 15 and 20,000 people. It is a staggering number that spans nearly every corner of the company, confirming that this can't possibly be the failing of any one team. It is systemic. And yet, the people who have designed and overseen the system continue to be its caretakers. I love great ideas, and I love ambitious vision. But what good are they without execution that benefits the entire team? I am so fucking tired of having to talk about these stories every week. And you know who is feeling way worse? All of the people who've been laid off. It is absurd, and something needs to change. So that is me on my high horse. Whatever. You deserve some good news. So let's end on this. Geo Media, in my humble opinion, is one of the most incompetently run media publications on the internet. But good news, it finally sold Kotaku, a publication that is very near and dear to my heart. The publication and its employees will join sister site Gizmodo at publisher Layoffs. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Anyway, the company has already suggested plans to grow Kotaku, which is currently a small team, and I am happy to say that I have heard some promising rumors that this isn't just an empty promise. Could we see more full-time jobs in games journalism this year? I hope so. Speaking of new jobs and sites, Paste Games has evolved into a standalone site. Endless Mode was an instant addition to my RSS feed, run by the incomparable Garrett Martin, one of gaming media's best spotters and supporters of talent. It deserves a spot on your reading list, and I'm not just saying that because they promise lots of theme park reporting, and you know I love my theme park reporting. Like I said, there are nice things. There's a lot of bad stuff out there, but I'm holding on to the stuff that brings me joy. And that is a wrap on Post Games' first annual video game physical. We did it! It's good, it's bad, it's in between. Next week, the life, death, and rebirth of Atari. I will tell you the peculiar story of Atari from Pong to the currently in development Atari Hotels. Yes, hotels. Seriously. Joining me, the CEO of Atari himself, Wade Rosen. Wade is an unusually open executive who is not afraid to talk about what matters most. Bubsy the cat. But for now, I begin my farewell. A reminder, post-game supporters, you get the show and the newsletter early on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern, sometimes a little early. They also get extra acts and bonus materials. This week, Patreon listeners got the State of Games 10, 20, and 30 years ago, plus an extra interview segment with Xalavier. That was a real fun one. Each month, they also get a video in my ongoing series, Video Game Journalism 101, Course on Media Literacy. The second episode goes live Monday. And no ads on anything. Subscribe to the Patreon at patreon.com/postgames. Subscribe to the newsletter for free at post.games. Post Games logo by James Barham. Theme by Mark Sparling. And a very special thank you to this week's guest, Xalavier Nelson Jr. And very last thing, I know, doing it again, but if you like the show, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving a review. Ideally on Apple Podcast. We're very early days, and I intend to make this show my full-time focus, and we can do that with your help. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.